Welcome to the Tao at Night. Tonight, we are resting with one of the oldest sayings in the Taoist tradition, and one of the most quietly misunderstood. Still water runs deep. We tend to hear this as a compliment. The quiet person has hidden depths. The still pool is more than it appears. But Lao Tzu was pointing at something more precise than a compliment. He was pointing at the relationship between stillness and depth itself. The still lake at night, its surface calm, unreadable, perfectly flat, does not look deep. A stone dropped into it will take longer to reach the bottom than its stillness would ever suggest. The stillness is not a hint at the depth. The stillness is the expression of it. This changes the teaching somewhat. It is not only that the quiet person might have hidden depths, it is that the calm surface is the signature of great depth. Turbulence is a surface phenomenon. Only shallow water ripples across its whole extent. The deep lake absorbs the stone with barely a murmur, not because it has nothing in it, because what is in it is settled. Tonight's chapters explore this through 13 traditions. What does the Tao say about the relationship between stillness and depth? What does genuine inner peace look like, and how is it different from emptiness? How do we recognize depth when it is not performing itself? You do not need to know anything about Taoist philosophy to be here tonight. These teachings are for anyone who has ever been underestimated for their quietness, or who has looked at their own stillness and wondered if it meant something was missing. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is, where you are listening from, and whether you are a front, back, or side sleeper. There are no wrong answers here, only fellow travelers finding their way to rest. So wherever you are right now, let yourself settle in. There is nothing to figure out. There is nowhere else to be. Thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night. Let us begin. Lao Tzu wrote that the great Tao flows everywhere, to the left and to the right. It nourishes all things and does not lord it over them. It accomplishes without claiming credit. It is clothed in smallness and plainness. This is the Tao's quality. It does not announce itself. It is simply what it is, without advertisement, without the performance of its own significance. This is also the quality of deep water. The ocean at its deepest is perfectly still. The greatest depth produces the least disturbance at the surface. If you did not know what you were looking at, you might mistake the deep water for shallow water and the shallow, turbulent water for deep. The turbulence is surface energy. The depth absorbs everything, wave, stone, weather, and continues. Lao Tzu saw this pattern everywhere. He called the quietest force the strongest. He called the most yielding substance the most persistent. He saw that the qualities we mistake for weakness, the soft, the yielding, the still, are the qualities that outlast every apparent strength. The teaching for tonight is built around this. Peace is not emptiness. The settled surface does not mean nothing is there. It means what is there has found its depth. The stone dropped into the deep lake does not mean the lake is shallow because it absorbs the stone with little fuss. It means the lake is deep enough that the stone's arrival changes nothing essential about what the lake is. You are deeper than you know. The quietness is not nothing. It is the surface expression of something very large beneath it. There was once a young student who mistook silence for emptiness. He had been traveling for some months in search of a teacher. Not any teacher, but the kind of teacher who could offer what he genuinely needed, which he understood to be depth. He had studied with several teachers already, and his assessment of them had been shaped by a particular measure: how much they said, and how impressively they said it. A teacher who spoke eloquently and at length on complex matters was, in his understanding, a teacher with a great deal inside them. A teacher who spoke little was, he assumed, a teacher who had little to offer. He arrived at a small dwelling near a lake one afternoon. He had been told that a teacher lived there. He came to the door and was admitted by a woman of late middle age who showed no particular interest in his arrival. She poured water. She indicated a seat. She sat down across from him. He waited for her to begin. She did not begin. She sat with a quality of stillness that he found, at first, pleasant, and then gradually somewhat unsettling, and then, after some minutes, vertiginously quiet. It was the kind of quiet that has weight to it. He was not accustomed to quiet with weight. "I have been looking for a teacher," he said, to break the silence and to establish why he was there. "I know," she said. "I have studied with several teachers," he said. He named them. He described what he had learned from each one. He was, he knew, doing several things at once, introducing himself, demonstrating his existing knowledge, and he was honest with himself about this, showing her that he was not an ordinary student. She listened. She did not show particular interest or particular boredom. She simply listened. "What are you looking for?" she asked when he had finished. "Depth," he said. It sounded slightly grand when he said it aloud, but it was true. "You came a long way," she said. "I did," he said. "And of the teachers you named," she said, "which one taught you the most?" He thought about this. He named one, the most eloquent of them, the one whose lectures had been the most intricate and the most impressive. She nodded slowly. "And what do you carry from that teaching?" He thought about this more carefully. He had been moved by the lectures. He had found them impressive and stimulating. When he tried to name specifically what he carried from them, what had changed in him, what he could now do or see that he could not before, he found he was reaching for something that was not quite there. "I am still integrating it," he said, which was true as far as it went. "Yes," she said. She was quiet again. He stayed at the lake for 3 days because she had not dismissed him, and he was not sure how to leave. She spoke rarely. She went about her days with the particular ease of someone who has made peace with the ordinary tasks of a life: the water drawn, the food prepared, the fire tended, without needing these tasks to be more than what they were. On the second day, he walked to the edge of the lake and dropped a stone into it. The surface was perfectly calm. The stone entered almost silently. The rings that spread from the point of entry were small and quickly gone. He watched the stone descend, a long, slow descent, much longer than he had expected. The water was clear, and the stone was visible for many seconds before the depth took it. He stood there for a while. On the third day, she spoke more than she had spoken in the previous 2 days combined. She spoke for perhaps an hour, sitting at the edge of the water in the early morning. What she said was not elaborate. It was not intricate. It had a quality of being entirely unadorned, as though the understanding had been worn smooth by long use, as the stones at the lake's edge had been worn smooth by the water, and what remained was exactly the essential shape and nothing else. He left with less than he had arrived hoping for, and considerably more than he had arrived able to receive. The difference, he understood on the walk home, was in the quality of the reception. The impressive lectures had arrived into him like stones into shallow water. Much disturbance, rapidly settling, not very deep. What she had offered had arrived differently. It had descended slowly. He was, he suspected, still watching it fall. Sufi teaching holds the concept of hal, the immediate, felt quality of presence in a moment of genuine spiritual opening, and the concept of maqam, the permanent station, the durable understanding arrived at through long practice and genuine depth. The distinction is important. The hal can be striking, visible, emotionally intense. The maqam is quiet. It does not perform itself. It is simply what the practitioner has become. The great Sufi teachers were, many of them, conspicuous for their quietness rather than their eloquence. Rabi'a al-Adawiyya, the 8th century mystic whose understanding of divine love was among the most refined in the tradition, was known for a quality of presence that those who met her described not in terms of what she said, but in terms of the quality of the silence around her. The silence was not the absence of teaching, it was the teaching. There is also in Sufi tradition the concept of sama, the listening, the specific quality of receptive presence that allows the divine to move through what it is moving through. And the deeper the sama, the more genuinely receptive, the less cluttered with the listener's own noise, the less visible it tends to be from the outside. The person in the deepest sama does not look transported. They look still. Think about the person in your life whose quietness you may have underestimated. The one in the meeting who rarely speaks, but when they do, the room reorganizes itself around what they said. The friend who listens more than they talk, and whose listening turns out to be the most valuable thing in the conversation. The person who has been through something very difficult, and whose quality of calm around that difficulty is not evidence that the difficulty was small, but evidence that the difficulty was genuinely metabolized. We are trained to read activity as substance. The turbulent surface looks like it is full of something. The still surface looks empty. But the turbulence is a surface phenomenon, and the stillness is a depth phenomenon, and these are easy to confuse from above. This shows up in ordinary life in the tendency to measure our own inner life by its activity, by how much we are processing, how much is visible, how much movement there is in our thoughts and feelings. A quiet day can feel like an empty day. A period of stillness can feel like a period of stagnation. But the quiet is often the period when the deepest settling is happening, when what has been churned is at last finding its level, when the stone dropped months ago is still, slowly descending. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of a period of rest or recovery. A week away, a stretch of genuine quiet, and how it looked, from the outside and sometimes from the inside too, like nothing happening. and how, at the end of it, something had changed that no amount of visible activity had been able to change. Right now, in this breath, the surface is still, not empty, settled, and the settling is the whole of what needs to happen tonight. The stone is still falling, the depth is receiving it. Let the surface rest. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the sage does not show off and therefore shines. This paradox, that the quality of genuine understanding is most visible precisely when it is not being displayed, is one of the recurring teachings in the Tao Te Ching and one of the hardest to receive. We are trained to trust what announces itself. We attend to what performs its own significance. And the quiet things, the people, the moments, the depths that do not perform, go consistently unnoticed until the moment they are needed. The Lakota tradition holds a specific and practical understanding of this. The knowledge that is earned through genuine experience rather than formal learning has a particular quality of understatement. The person who has truly encountered the thing they know about does not need to demonstrate their knowing. The knowing is simply present in how they move and what they see and what they do not need to say. This is not about cultivated modesty. It is about something more structural. The person whose understanding is genuine has no gap to fill. The performance of knowledge is often a way of managing the anxiety that the knowledge might not be sufficient. The person whose knowledge is sufficient, whose understanding has descended to the level of genuine depth, does not experience that anxiety. There is nothing to perform. The deep lake does not display its depth. You discover it only by dropping a stone in and watching how long the descent takes. The lake is not concealing anything. It simply has no interest in advertising what it is. It is too busy being it. There was once a young warrior who dismissed the calm elder because he did not boast. The community he lived in had a tradition of speaking one's accomplishments before the council, a tradition meant to establish credibility and to help the community know what each person could offer. The young warrior had many genuine accomplishments, and he spoke them clearly. He admired this practice. It made visible what was otherwise invisible. It gave the community knowledge it needed. But there was an elder in the community, a man of great age, whose past the young warrior knew only in outline, whose daily presence in the community was so quiet and so ordinary that the young warrior had never found reason to pay him particular attention. In the council, this elder rarely spoke. He listened with great attention and occasionally asked a question, but he did not often offer positions or recommendations. He was simply present and quiet, and when he did speak, what he said was short. The young warrior had formed a private assessment of this elder. He was a man of limited depth who had found a way to seem wise by being quiet. The young warrior had seen this pattern before. The silence, he believed, was strategic rather than substantial. A season of particular difficulty came to the community, a situation that required navigating terrain that none of the younger members had encountered. The council gathered. Many positions were offered, many assessments were given. The young warrior offered his own, which was genuinely good. He had thought carefully, he had observed well, and what he offered was real. But the situation was more complex than anyone had initially recognized. As the council went on, it became clear that the usual approaches were not sufficient. The situation had dimensions that the community's recent experience had not prepared it for. The elder had been listening. He had said nothing for a very long time. Now he spoke. He spoke for a short time, not long, not elaborately. He named three things: a quality of the situation that no one else had noticed, a parallel from a period of difficulty the community had faced several generations earlier that he was the only one present old enough to remember, and a specific recommendation that emerged from both of these. The council was quiet for a moment after he finished. The young warrior looked at the elder. He had been watching him throughout the council, and he had seen something he had not expected. The elder's quality of attention during all the speaking before his own had been extraordinary. He had been listening in a way that absorbed everything, that missed nothing, that was not preparing its own position, but was genuinely receiving what was being offered. The quality of listening was visible when you knew to look for it as a specific kind of stillness, not absence, the opposite of absence. The recommendation proved right, not spectacularly, not dramatically, but solidly right in the specific and durable way of things that are right because they are grounded in deep understanding rather than sharp thinking. The community followed it. The months that followed demonstrated the wisdom in it, and several of the people who had been most forceful in the council, who had offered the most elaborate positions in the most confident voices, came quietly and separately to acknowledge that they had not seen what the elder had seen. They did not ask how he had seen it. They did not need to by then. They had watched the outcome. After the council, the young warrior found a moment to sit with the elder. "You had been here before," the young warrior said. He meant in this kind of situation. "Many times," the elder said. "Why did you not say so earlier?" the young warrior asked. The elder was quiet for a moment. He seemed to be considering how to answer. "The talking was necessary," he said finally. "The things that were said before I spoke, they were not wrong. They were part of what needed to be said, and I could not say what I said until I had heard all of that." He looked at the young warrior steadily. The listening is not the waiting to speak. The listening is its own work, and the depth of what can be offered at the end depends on the quality of the listening that precedes it. The young warrior thought about this for a long time afterward. He thought about what the elder had carried all those years in his quiet presence at the councils, not absence, not strategic silence, but the enormous ongoing work of listening, which goes entirely unnoticed until the moment it produces the thing that the talking alone could not have produced. Lakota tradition holds the concept of wasintanka, great-mindedness, the quality of the person whose understanding is broad and deep, and whose presence in the community reflects this without announcing it. The wasintanka person is not the loudest voice. They are the one whose words, when they come, settle the matter that the loud voices have been unable to settle. The teaching of the Wikasa Wakan, The sacred person, the person of deep understanding in Lakota tradition, is specifically not a teaching about performance or display. The Wikasawakan is known by the quality of what they produce, not by the quality of their self-presentation. And what they produce is often the right word at the right moment, not an elaboration of everything they know, but the specific, precise offering that the moment requires. This precision is possible only from depth. The shallow person gives everything they have in every moment because they cannot afford to hold anything back. The deep person can afford to offer exactly what is needed and no more. There is also in Lakota teaching the concept of the tiaspe, the extended family, the community of genuine relationship, and the understanding that within the tiaspe, depth is recognized over time rather than in any single encounter. The person of genuine depth is known by the accumulation of what they have offered across many councils, many seasons, many moments of genuine difficulty. The assessment is slow and it is accurate. And what it is assessing is not the display, it is what is actually there. Think about the quiet competence in your life that has never been performed. The thing you genuinely know in the specific, settled way that comes from having actually been in the thing, not from having read about it or prepared a position on it, that you rarely announce. The understanding that is simply part of how you see things, how you move through your work and your relationships, how you recognize certain things immediately that others are still working out. This is the deep water. You may not think of it as depth, because depth does not draw attention to itself. It is simply what is there. This shows up in ordinary life in the gap between knowing something and demonstrating the knowing, and how the people who demonstrate most vigorously are often not the people who know most deeply. The most anxious about being recognized as knowledgeable are often the people for whom the knowledge is most precarious. The people for whom the knowledge is solid and settled rarely feel the urgency to prove it. The lake does not announce its depth. It simply is what it is. You may have felt this yourself in the specific experience of being in a situation where your genuine understanding produced something, a question that redirected the whole conversation, a noticing that no one else had noticed, an assessment that proved right, not through cleverness but through settled experience, and how this thing, when it came quietly, not performed, just offered. Right now, in this breath, whatever you genuinely know is present with you, settled, not requiring display. The council may or may not call for it tonight, but the depth is there regardless. The lake does not depend on anyone dropping a stone in it to be deep. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that those who know do not speak, and those who speak do not know. This is not a prescription for silence. It is an observation about the relationship between genuine understanding and the compulsion to display it. The person who has genuinely arrived somewhere does not need to announce their arrival. The announcing is what happens when the arrival is uncertain, when the position needs to be secured, when the knowing is still at the surface level where it feels precarious. The Stoic tradition noticed the same pattern from a different angle. The Stoic concept of the prokopon, the one making progress, is specifically about the quality of progress that is invisible from the outside. The prokopon is not performing their growth, they are engaged in it. And genuine engagement with inner development tends to produce less visible activity, not more. The student who is genuinely integrating something is quiet in a way the student who has just encountered it is not. This applies to the question of how we hold our own development. The period when we feel we are making the most progress is often the period of the most visible struggle, the most turbulence at the surface. The period when we feel we are stagnating is often the period when the deepest settling is happening, when the understanding that was taken in at the surface is finally descending toward the level where it becomes genuinely part of us. The surface turbulence was the stone entering the water. The stillness after is the stone descending. Both are necessary, but only the second one is depth. There was once a student who believed he had stopped growing because he had grown quiet. He had been studying philosophy for several years. In the early years, the study had been turbulent, full of sudden realizations, vigorous debates, positions held and then overturned, new ideas that reorganized everything he had previously thought. He had been, in those years, visibly in the process. Anyone who spent time with him could see that something was working in him. He argued freely. He changed his mind publicly. He had the specific excited energy of someone in the middle of a genuine encounter with ideas. Then, gradually, the turbulence had lessened. He was still studying. He still read with attention, he still engaged with his teacher's questions, but the excitements were quieter, the reorganizations were subtler, the vigorous positions were fewer. He felt less like someone working through something and more like someone simply present with it, sitting with the understanding the way you sit with a view you have seen many times. The view is still there. You are still looking, but it no longer produces the response that a new view produces. He came to his teacher with this. "I think I have stopped making progress," he said. His teacher, a woman of considerable experience, who had taught many students through many stages, looked at him with the mild interest she brought to everything. "What makes you think so?" she asked. "I am quieter," he said. "I debate less. I am less surprised by things. The ideas that used to feel new now feel familiar." He paused. "It feels like the energy is gone out of it." She was quiet for a moment. "Come with me," she said. She led him out to the courtyard behind the building where they worked. In the center of the courtyard was a stone basin, a large, deep basin that collected rainwater, always full, its surface usually still. She stopped at the edge of it. "When it rains," she said, "what does this look like?" "Agitated," he said. "All those rings from the drops, the surface moving constantly." "And between rains," she said. "Still," he said. "And which condition," she said, "holds more water?" He looked at the basin. The still surface was, of course, the full basin. The agitated surface during rain was the basin filling, receiving the input but not yet settled. "Still," he said. "Yes," she said. She looked at the basin for a moment. The agitation is the receiving. The rain comes in and the surface moves and there is considerable visible activity. This is real. The water is arriving. Something is happening. She paused. But the settling after the rain is when the water becomes part of the basin, when it is no longer arriving but simply there, present, held. She looked at him. The visible activity of the early years was the understanding arriving. The quietness you feel now is not the absence of the understanding. It is the understanding settling, becoming part of what you carry rather than part of what is still being taken in. But it feels like less, he said. Yes, she said. The full basin is not dramatic. It does not splash. It does not demonstrate its fullness. She paused. What would you say if I told you that the student who argues most vigorously is almost never the one who understands most deeply? He was quiet. The arguing is the surface receiving the rain, she said. It is real, and it is necessary, and there is a time for it. But the one who has understood deeply does not need to argue. They need, instead, to simply be what they have become, to act from it, to see from it, to speak from it when speaking is what the moment needs. She looked at him directly. The energy has not gone out of it. It has gone into it. It is now inside the understanding rather than on its surface. And that is what depth is. He returned to his study. He was still quiet, but the quality of the quiet had changed, or rather his understanding of the quiet had changed. He stopped interpreting it as absence. He started understanding it as the condition of depth. Stoic philosophy holds the concept of ataraxia, the quality of undisturbed peace, the tranquility that is not the absence of engagement, but the settled ground from which genuine engagement becomes possible. The Stoics distinguished carefully between ataraxia and apathy. Apathy is indifference, the absence of response, the closing off of the self from what the world offers and demands. Ataraxia is the opposite of this. It is the quality of being fully present and fully responsive, but from a ground of genuine equanimity that is not disturbed by what arrives. Marcus Aurelius, who practiced Stoic philosophy while being responsible for the governance of an empire, a role that produced daily encounters with difficulty, turbulence, and crisis, wrote about ataraxia in his private journals as the quality he was daily working to maintain. Not the absence of difficulty, not insulation from what the world brought, but the quality of meeting what arrived from a still center rather than a turbulent surface. The still center was not passive, it was the most active thing about him. It was from the still center that the capacity to act rightly in difficult circumstances was generated. There is also in Stoic teaching the concept of melite, practice, the daily returning to the exercises of the philosophical life, not because the practitioner does not already know them, but because the knowing requires continual deepening. The Stoic who has practiced for many years does not practice less. They practice differently. The early practice is the surface receiving the rain. The mature practice is the basin, full, still, replenishing itself daily through the continued practice without requiring the visible activity of filling. Think about the inner settling that you have been misreading as stagnation. The period of your life or your practice when the visible activity slowed, when the excitements became less frequent, when the dramatic reorganizations gave way to something quieter, and how you interpreted this shift as arriving somewhere, as losing something, as the energy going out of what had previously been alive. The stone entered the water some time ago. The surface turbulence is long since gone. The stone is still descending in the specific quiet of deep water where descent takes much longer than expected. And the descent is the deepening. This shows up in ordinary life in the relationship to long commitments, the marriage or the friendship or the creative practice that no longer produces the constant excitement of the early period, and whether you read this as something going wrong or something going right. The early turbulence was the water receiving the rain. The present stillness is the basin full. One is not better than the other, but they are different, and the mistake is to want the basin always to look like rain. You may have felt this yourself in the specific experience of returning to something you had set aside, a practice, a relationship, a way of seeing, after time away, and finding that something in you had continued working on it in the interval without your knowing. The understanding that was at the surface when you set it aside had, in the period of apparent absence, descended. And what you found when you returned was deeper than what you had left. Right now, in this breath, the basin is full. Whatever is in you that has been settling, let it settle. Let it settle. The still surface is not nothing. The stone is not lost. It is simply somewhere you cannot see yet, and that is the whole nature of depth. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the highest good is like water. Water benefits all things and does not compete. It goes to the low places that others disdain. In this, it is close to the Tao. Water's depth is not announced. It is simply arrived at by following the natural direction of the world, downward to the place that other things avoid. The Hindu tradition holds a related teaching in its understanding of the nature of genuine understanding, the understanding that arrives not through effort and display, but through the patient following of what is already there. The deep river is deep because it has followed its own course for long enough. It did not decide to be deep. It became deep by being fully what a river is, moving, carving, following the path of least resistance over long enough time that the path has become a canyon. This is one of the most important distinctions in Taoist thought, the difference between depth that is achieved through forcing and depth that is arrived at through genuine following. The lake is not deep because it worked hard to be deep. It is deep because it has been what it is for a very long time, and time, the patient, unhurried continuity of simply being what you are, produces depth that effort alone cannot produce. The person who arrives at genuine inner peace does not arrive there through a heroic act of will. They arrive there through the patient, humble, daily returning to the actual ground of their own life, not the life they are performing, the life that is simply happening in the low places, in the ordinary and unglamorous dailiness of a genuine life. This is where the depth accumulates. This is where the water goes when it follows its own nature. There was once a pilgrim who learned the depth of the river by entering it. He had been walking for many days through unfamiliar country when he came to a river. He needed to cross it. The river was wide, not violently rushing, but steady and substantial, moving with the particular quiet confidence of a river that has been flowing for a very long time. The surface was calm enough. There were no visible rapids. The water looked clear, and the bottom was visible. He stood at the bank and assessed the crossing. A local ferryman was there, an old man with a small boat who spent his days carrying people across and had the specific patience of someone for whom the river was not a challenge but a companion. "I can cross here," the pilgrim said. It was not quite a question. "You can try," the ferryman said. He said it without particular warning or alarm. He was watching the pilgrim with the mild attention of someone who had seen many travellers make many assessments of the river. "The water looks shallow enough," the pilgrim said. "I can see the bottom clearly." "You can see the bottom on this side," the ferryman said. "It gets harder to see as you go further." "But the surface is calm," the pilgrim said. "There's no current here." "There is always current," the ferryman said, "more than you can see from the bank." The pilgrim was confident. The water was clear. The surface was calm. The bottom looked close. He waded in. For the first several steps he was right. The water was cold but manageable, reaching his knees, the bottom firm and clear beneath him. He kept going. Then the bottom dropped. Not dramatically, not a sudden fall, but a gradual deepening that caught him off guard because the surface had given no sign of it. The water rose to his waist, then to his chest. The current he had not been able to see from the bank was present here, not violent, but steady, and in deep water that steadiness had a weight and a persistence that the shallow water's absence of current had not prepared him for. He stopped moving. He stood still in the river, the current pressing against him, the bottom still there beneath his feet, but now much further down. After a moment, he made his way back to the bank. He was wet but unhurt. The ferryman was watching him with no particular expression. "The still surface," the pilgrim said. He was working something out as he said it. "The still surface is what the deep water looks like," the ferryman said. "From above, the shallow water ripples because the current can reach the surface. In deep water, the current is far below the surface. The surface doesn't know about it." The pilgrim looked at the river. He was seeing it differently now. The perfect calm of the surface was not the absence of the river's power. It was the signature of the river's depth. "You should have warned me more directly," he said. "Would you have believed it?" the ferryman asked. The pilgrim thought about this honestly. He had been very confident. He had believed his own assessment, which was based on what the surface showed. "Probably not," he said. "No," the ferryman agreed. "People rarely believe what they cannot see, when what they can see tells them what they want to hear." He pushed the small boat out from the bank. "Come, I will take you across." On the far bank, the pilgrim stood for a moment, looking back at the river. The surface was as calm as it had been when he arrived. Nothing about it had changed. He had changed. He knew now what the stillness meant. It was not shallowness. It had never been shallowness. It was the surface expression of something that went very far down. Hindu philosophical tradition holds the concept of antarmukha, the inward turning, the quality of awareness that moves toward its own depth rather than toward external objects and displays. The antarmukha quality is not withdrawal from the world. It is the specific direction of the deepest awareness, inward rather than outward, toward the source rather than toward the surface. The Mandukya Upanishad describes 4 states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and the 4th state, turiya, which is the pure awareness that underlies all 3. And turiya is described as inherently still, not because it is inactive, but because it is so fundamental that everything else moves within it, rather than it moving within anything. It is the depth. The other states are the surface. There is also in Hindu teaching the concept of shanti, peace, the quality of settled inner stillness that is not the absence of engagement, but its foundation. The Shanti invocation at the end of teaching, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, is offered 3 times, not for emphasis, but to address the 3 sources of disturbance: that which comes from the outer world, that which comes from other beings, and that which arises within ourselves. The peace sought is not one that removes these. It is the quality of depth that allows them to arrive at the surface without disturbing the ground. Think about the still water you have misread as shallow, the person in your life whose calm you have taken for emptiness, the situation in your life that seems settled and therefore seems to be missing something, missing the urgency, the drama, the evidence of something happening, the quality in yourself, the specific quietness of your own deepest ground, that you have been measuring against the surface activity and finding insufficient. The calm river is the deep river. The turbulent stretch is the shallow stretch. These are simply features of rivers, and they are features of lives, and the confusion between them is universal and ancient and persistent. This shows up in ordinary life in the assessment of people who don't perform their interior life, who don't describe what they are going through in real time, who don't bring the turbulence to the surface for others to witness, and the tendency to assume that nothing is happening in them, and how sometimes you discover in a specific quiet moment that something very deep was happening all along, simply below the surface you could see from the bank. You may have felt this yourself in the experience of realizing, in retrospect, that the period of your life that felt the flattest, the period when nothing seemed to be happening, was the period when the most permanent change was being made. The bottom had dropped. The current was steady and deep and invisible from the surface, and you were crossing it without quite knowing how deep you were. Right now, in this breath, you are in the river. The bottom may be closer than you thought, or it may be further. The surface is what you can see. The depth is what you are in. Let the current carry what it carries. The crossing is already happening. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. and whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that emptying oneself of accumulated things is the way of the Tao, not accumulating more, not becoming more full of positions and certainties, but allowing the vessel to remain genuinely open, genuinely receivable, capable of being filled freshly by whatever the present moment actually contains. This is not the emptiness of the shallow. This is the cultivated spaciousness of the genuinely deep. Buddhist teaching has a precise version of this insight. The difference between the still mind and the distracted mind is not that the still mind is empty of content. It is that the still mind's content is not generating constant reaction. The agitated mind is agitated because it is constantly responding to its own content, producing reactions to its own reactions, generating turbulence from the inside, keeping its own surface in motion through internal weather. The still mind can hold the same content without this internal turbulence, not through suppression, through depth. The meditation tradition is built around this observation. The early stages of meditation practice are almost universally described as more turbulent than ordinary life. The attention brought to the mind reveals how much activity was already there, previously unnoticed because it was simply the background. This is the stone entering the water. The practice is the long settling after, and the practitioner who has been genuinely practicing for a long time has not achieved the absence of mental content. They have achieved the depth that allows the content to arise and pass without the surface staying permanently disturbed. The still mind is not the mind with nothing in it. It is the mind deep enough that what enters it descends quietly, is held, and in its own time returns to the depth from which it came. There was once a monk who believed his mind was still because he had silenced its surface. He had been practicing for many years. He had arrived, through genuine and dedicated effort, at a quality of meditation that was impressive by any outward measure. He could sit for long periods without visible agitation. He appeared calm to everyone who observed him. He had received acknowledgment from his teachers for his dedication and his consistency. But in private, in the depths of his practice, he knew something that the outward appearance did not reflect. He had achieved the surface stillness by suppression rather than by depth. He had learned, through years of disciplined effort, to hold the surface flat, to push down what arose, to prevent the ripples, to maintain the appearance of calm through a kind of continuous internal management that was, paradoxically, the opposite of peace. The effort required to maintain the surface stillness was enormous. He was exhausted by it, and beneath the flat surface, everything that had been suppressed was still there, pressing. He came to an elder in his tradition, a monk of very advanced practice, who had the specific quality that the young monk's suppressed surface did not, a genuineness of stillness that seemed to come from somewhere below the surface, that was present without being maintained, that did not cost anything visible. "My mind is quiet," the young monk said, "but it costs everything to keep it quiet." The elder looked at him without particular surprise. This, his expression suggested, was not an uncommon confession. "Tell me how you do it," the elder said. The young monk described it, the specific techniques of suppression, the way he would notice an arising thought or feeling and push it away, the way he had trained himself to hold the surface flat through a kind of internal discipline that he applied continuously throughout his practice. The elder nodded slowly. "Come with me," he said. He led the young monk to the monastery's fish pond, a small pond in the garden, not deep, with a flat stone surface around it. He picked up a small stone and held it out to the young monk. "Drop it in," he said. The young monk dropped the stone. The rings spread, the surface agitated. They watched together until the surface settled. "What did you do to make it settle?" the elder asked. "Nothing," the young monk said. "It settled on its own." "Yes," the elder said. He picked up another stone. He held it out. "Now, when I drop this one, make it not ripple." The young monk looked at the pond. He had no way to make the stone not ripple. There was no technique that would prevent the ripples. The only way to stop the ripples from spreading would be to catch the stone before it entered the water, which would mean not dropping it at all. "I cannot," he said. "No," the elder said. He let the stone fall. The rings spread. They watched. "What you can do," the elder said, watching the rings move outward, "is not interfere with the settling." He paused. "The surface that is held flat by suppression is the surface that is holding the stone above the water. The stone never enters. The settling never happens. The effort of holding is infinite because the stone is still there, requiring to be held." The young monk sat with this. "The stillness I have is not stillness," he said slowly. "It is effort," the elder said, "which is real and not worthless. The effort has built certain qualities in you that will become useful, but it is not yet the stillness you are looking for." He looked at the pond. "Let the stone enter the water. Let the rings spread. Do not suppress what arises, and then do not interfere with the settling. The settling is what you are actually looking for, and the settling can only happen if you allow the stone to fall." The young monk's practice changed after this. The surface became, for a time, more turbulent than it had been when he was suppressing, because what he had been suppressing now had room to arise. But the arising, no longer met with suppression, settled in its own time. And what the settling revealed was different from what the suppression had produced. Genuine, earned, not the flat surface maintained by effort, the depth that makes the surface flat without effort. Buddhist teaching holds the concept of samatha, the calm abiding, the quality of settled stillness that is the foundation of genuine meditative practice. And the careful distinction in Buddhist teaching between samatha and suppression is one of the most important in the tradition. Suppression pushes down what arises. Samatha is the quality of presence that allows what arises to arise, be fully itself, and pass in its own time without the practitioner either grasping it or fighting it. The Anapanasati Sutta, the teachings on mindfulness of breathing, describes the settled mind not as a mind that does not have thoughts, but as a mind that has found a quality of relationship to thoughts that is non-reactive. The thoughts arise, the practitioner notices, the thoughts pass. The still surface is not achieved by preventing the stone from falling. It is achieved by developing a depth of water that absorbs the stone quietly. There is also in Buddhist teaching the concept of samadhi, the concentrated, unified state of deep meditation, which is described not as effortful suppression of content, but as the natural result of depth. The practitioner who has achieved genuine samadhi is not holding anything flat. They are in a quality of presence that is so deep that what arises in it settles quickly, the way a stone dropped into deep water produces smaller rings and sinks more quickly than a stone dropped into a shallow pond. The depth is the medium, and depth is not achieved by management. It is arrived at through the patient, consistent returning to the practice. Think about the stillness in you that is being maintained rather than inhabited, the quality of calm that requires constant effort, the composure that is a performance of composure rather than the genuine article, the peace that is actually the suppression of everything that is not peace. This kind of stillness is real in its way and costs genuinely, and the cost is usually what gives it away. The person maintaining the flat surface is tired in a specific way, a way that genuine stillness does not produce. And then think about the moments when the genuine stillness arrived, not because you achieved it through effort, but because something let go, the specific texture of those moments, how different they are from the managed calm. How the managed calm is something you do, and the genuine stillness is something you arrive in. How the doing always takes something, and the arriving restores something. This shows up in ordinary life, in the difference between a night of managed, suppressed sleep, the kind where you are holding things at bay, managing the surface of the mind to prevent disturbance, and a night where something genuinely let go, and the sleep was simply deep. The first kind is tiring. The second kind restores, the same hours, completely different in quality. You may have felt this yourself in the experience of a sudden, unexpected release, the moment when what you had been managing finally dropped into the water, finally entered rather than being held above the surface, and the specific quality of rest that followed, not the absence of the content that had been managed, the depth that could receive it. Right now, in this breath, let the stone fall. Whatever has been held, let it enter. The water is here. The water is deep enough, and what descends tonight in the genuine quiet of this dark will settle by morning into something you can carry without effort. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the sage's words are few and their actions are complete. There is no gap between what the sage says and what the sage does. Not because the sage is particularly disciplined, but because what the sage says comes from a depth that is already aligned with how the sage lives. The words and the life are the same water. The Hasidic tradition has a specific and beautiful way of describing this alignment, the concept of devekut, cleaving, the quality of being continuously attached to what is deepest, of living from the depth rather than from the surface. The person in genuine devekut does not perform their depth, they simply live from it. And what comes from it, their words, their actions, their quality of presence, carries the specific weight and settledness of something that comes from very far down. This is the difference between the person who speaks from the surface and the person who speaks from depth. The surface speaking is quick, reactive, shaped by the immediate stimuli of the situation. The depth speaking takes longer to arrive. It may not arrive until the moment has passed, and when it arrives, what it offers is so precise and so settled that it reorganizes everything that preceded it. The quiet that precedes the depth speaking is not blankness. It is the specific quality of attention required to listen all the way down to where the genuine response lives. And the genuine response, when it rises, does not announce itself as wisdom. It simply says what is true from the place where truth is settled rather than constructed. There was once a young scholar who judged a Rebbe by how little he said. The young scholar was learned, genuinely so. He had studied the tradition for many years with real care and real intelligence, and his command of the texts was impressive by any measure. He had come to visit a particular Rebbe, a man of some reputation in the tradition, partly out of genuine seeking, and partly, he admitted to himself, to take the measure of the reputation and see if it matched the reality. The gathering he attended was a modest one, perhaps a dozen people in the Rebbe's study, sitting in the informal arrangement that characterized this teacher's style. The Rebbe himself was a small man of great age, whose physical presence was not remarkable in any immediately visible way. He sat in an ordinary chair. He was dressed simply. He did not occupy the center of the room in any obvious sense. The gathering began. Others spoke. Questions, observations, pieces of learning offered for consideration. The young scholar offered something of his own, a section of text he had been working with, his interpretation, what he took it to mean. It was well received. He felt the satisfaction of having contributed something genuine. The Rebbe, throughout all of this, said very little. He listened. He occasionally nodded. Once he asked a single question, a short question, simply phrased, that redirected a lengthy discussion in a way the young scholar noticed but could not entirely account for. Mostly, though, he was simply present and quiet. The young scholar went away from the gathering with a mild disappointment. The reputation, he concluded privately, was larger than the substance. The Rebbe said little. He offered little. The gatherings in his study were interesting, and the people who attended them were thoughtful people who produced interesting exchanges. But the Rebbe himself was perhaps, he searched for the word, a vessel rather than a source. The gathering happened around him without really coming from him. A year later, the young scholar encountered a different situation, a question in his own life, a genuine question about how to act in a particular difficulty, not a textual question but a living one, that he could not resolve through his existing understanding. He tried. He applied everything he had. He was thorough and he was honest, and he arrived at nothing he could trust. He went back to the Rebbe. The gathering this time was very small, only 3 or 4 people besides himself. The young scholar described his situation. He was careful and thorough. The Rebbe listened with the same quality of attention he had brought to the larger gathering, a quality of attention that the young scholar, now that he was describing something he genuinely needed help with, found he could feel in a way he had not before. The attention was not assessment, It was something more like receiving, like water receiving what was poured into it. When the young scholar finished, the Rebbe was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, briefly, in a few sentences, none of them elaborate. What he said was not a technique or a prescription. It was a way of seeing the situation that had not occurred to the young scholar, that reorganized the whole question, that made the answer visible in a way it had not been. The young scholar sat with it. "How did you know that?" he asked finally. The Rebbe looked at him with mild, warm attention. "I listened to what you said," he said, "and I listened to what you did not say." He paused. "These are not always the same." The young scholar understood then what the silence had been in the larger gatherings. It had not been absence. It had been the listening that had been going all the way down through the surface of what was said to where the actual question lived, the question beneath the question, the need beneath the need. And from that depth, the response that came was the precise and settled thing that surface speaking could not produce. Hasidic teaching holds the concept of ayin, nothingness, the divine nothingness from which all creation arises, as a positive quality rather than a lack. The ayin is not the absence of the divine, it is the ground of it. And the person who has cultivated the quality of ayin in themselves, who has made space, who has descended below the surface noise to the genuine ground, is the person from whom genuine yesh, genuine presence and substance, can arise. The Baal Shem Tov taught that genuine prayer is not the performance of prayer, but the emptying of the self that allows the divine to pray through the one who is praying. The Rebbe who says little in the gathering is often the Rebbe who has gone furthest down, who has arrived at the level where the distinction between the teaching and the teacher has dissolved, where what is offered comes not from the teacher's accumulated content, but from the genuine ground beneath it. There is also in Hasidic teaching the concept of histapkut, contentment, sufficiency, the quality of being genuinely at peace with what is, rather than always reaching for more. And histapkut is described as a form of depth. The person who is genuinely content is the person whose roots go deep enough that the surface conditions do not define their stability. The tree whose roots are shallow is defined by the weather. The tree whose roots go deep holds in wind and drought alike, not because it is indifferent to the weather, but because its ground is deeper than the weather can reach. Think about the listening you have been giving and the quality of what you are listening to. The conversation where you are constructing your response while the other person is still speaking. The meeting where you are aware of the surface of what is being said and preparing your surface reply. The quality of attention that stays at the level of what is being explicitly offered and does not listen for what lives below the words. And then think about the conversations where the listening went deeper than that, where something in you went quiet in a specific way and what the other person was actually saying became audible, not just the words, but the thing beneath the words, the question beneath the question, the need beneath the stated need, the listening that receives rather than prepares. This shows up in ordinary life in the difference between being heard and being listened to, and how rarely the two coincide, and how unmistakable it is when someone is genuinely doing the second thing. The quality of being received, when it happens, is one of the rarest and most valued experiences in a life, and it comes from depth in the listener, not from technique. You may have felt this yourself in the specific experience of talking to someone and feeling, partway through, that what you were saying had entered them, not just been registered on the surface, but genuinely received. And how different that is from the far more common experience of talking at a mirror. Right now, in this breath, something is listening, not to the content of the night, but to the quality of this moment, this body, this tiredness, this particular shape of the day just ended. Something receives all of this, and the receiving is quiet, and the quiet is the depth. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote about the quality of the great vessel, the thing that is completed late, that does not show itself quickly, that requires time and spaciousness to come into what it is. He was pointing at something about the nature of genuine depth, that it does not arrive on schedule. It does not appear when the schedule says it should. It arrives when the conditions of genuine ripening have been met, and those conditions cannot be forced, only tended. Zen teaching holds a direct version of this in its understanding of satori, the moment of genuine insight, the seeing through, and the specific Zen understanding that satori cannot be produced by effort. It can be prepared for. The conditions can be cultivated. The question can be held with genuine attention for as long as it takes, but the moment of genuine seeing arrives of its own, and it very often arrives in a moment of complete quietness, of complete non-striving, after the effort, in the aftermath of the long preparation, when the doing has finally given way to the simple being. The still water is the water in which the reflection is visible. The turbulent water reflects nothing clearly. The depth of the still lake allows a clear sky to appear in it, not because the lake has become the sky, but because the lake's stillness is the condition of genuine receiving. The teaching, the insight, the genuine perception of what is actually there, these arrive in the still mind, not because the still mind has done nothing to deserve them, because the still mind has done the specific and demanding work of becoming still enough to receive them. There was once a calligraphy student who could not understand why his quietest piece was the most alive. He had been studying the art for several years, under a teacher of considerable experience who had spent her entire working life attending to the relationship between the brush, the ink, the paper, and the breath. The teacher's own work was widely admired, not for its energy, which was present, but for a quality of settledness within the energy that made it feel as though the characters had arrived rather than been produced. The student was technically skilled. His command of the forms was genuinely good. He was also energetic in his approach. He brought considerable expressive force to his practice, which showed in his work. His characters had vitality. They were, he felt, alive. He produced 2 pieces in the same week. The first was a piece he had put great effort into, a formal commission of some importance to him, which he had worked on with full attention, bringing his best technical skill and his fullest expressive energy. When it was done, he felt satisfied. It was, he believed, among his best work. The second piece was produced in a different mood. He had come to the practice room at the end of a long and slightly exhausting day, not intending to produce anything of consequence, simply maintaining the daily practice. He had been quiet in a way he was not usually quiet. He had no particular purpose. He sat for a while before touching the brush. He was not sure afterward exactly what had happened in the sitting, only that by the time he picked up the brush, something in him had settled in a way that the usual preparation did not produce. The piece he made in that sitting was quiet. It was not his most technically impressive work. The forms were a little freer than his usual precision. The energy was internal, present but not displayed. When he finished and looked at it, his first response was uncertainty. It did not look like what he usually produced. He showed both pieces to his teacher. She looked at them for a long time. "Which do you think is the better piece?" he asked. She indicated the quiet one. He was genuinely surprised. "The first one has more energy," he said. "The forms are more precise." "Yes," she said. She looked at both pieces again. "The first piece shows what you can do. The second piece shows what you are." She paused. "Both of these are real, but only one of them comes from below the surface." "I didn't try as hard on the second one," he said. "No," she said. "You stopped trying." She looked at him. "The trying is necessary for a long time. The trying builds the skill, the form, the capacity. Without the trying, there is nothing to draw from. But the trying is not the deepest thing you have. It is the preparation for the deepest thing." She looked at the quiet piece. "On the day you made this, you stopped producing the character and allowed it to arrive. This is a different thing from producing it, rarer, and what arrives is different from what is produced." He looked at the 2 pieces with this framing. The energetic one was, he could see now, full of him, his effort, his skill, his expressive force. It was very much the product of his doing. The quiet one was different. It was somehow less full of him, as though he had gotten out of the way at the moment of making, and what had come through was something that was his, but not only his, the long lineage of the form, the specific quality of that particular moment. The ink and the paper responding to each other in ways that the effortful producing would not have permitted. "How do I do it again?" he asked. She looked at him with something warm and slightly amused. "You cannot do it again," she said. "You cannot produce it. You can only prepare the conditions in which it becomes possible to arrive. And the most important condition is the one you had that day. You had stopped needing to produce something. You had arrived at the practice without an agenda, and in the absence of the agenda there was room for something else." Zen teaching holds the concept of mushin, no mind, the quality of presence in which the practitioner is fully engaged and fully present, but not caught in the deliberative, self-monitoring quality of ordinary mind. Mushin is not the absence of the practitioner. It is the practitioner fully present without the self-consciousness that separates the doer from the doing. The calligrapher in Mushin is not thinking about the character. The character is happening through them. This quality is related to the Zen understanding of Wu Wei, or in Chinese, the direct equivalent of Wu Wei, the principle of non-forcing that appears in Taoist teaching as well. The Mushin state and the Wu Wei action arise from the same ground, the genuine depth from which action can emerge without the friction of the self-monitoring surface. The ripples of self-consciousness are the shallow water phenomenon. In deep water, the action moves differently. There is also in Zen teaching the concept of shoshin, beginner's mind, the quality of genuine openness and freshness that is available in every moment when the mind is not cluttered by its accumulated certainties. And shoshin in the Zen understanding is not the absence of experience, it is the quality of experiencing freshly despite and through the experience. The master in shoshin meets each moment as though it is new, not because they have forgotten their experience, but because their depth allows them to be genuinely present to the newness of this particular moment rather than mapping it onto previous ones. Think about the thing you made, or said, or did when you stopped trying. The specific piece of work that emerged in a moment of quiet that you did not plan. The conversation where you stopped preparing your words and simply said the true thing. The decision you made, not from deliberation, but from a quality of settled knowing that was simply there, already complete, when you arrived at the moment of choice. All of these came from below the surface. All of them have a quality that the effortful versions rarely match. We spend enormous amounts of energy trying to produce the things that can only arrive. The effort is not wasted. It is what builds the capacity from which the arriving becomes possible. But the effort is not the arriving. The effort is the preparation. And the preparation, at a certain point, must give way to the specific quality of not preparing, the readiness to receive what the effort has been preparing you to receive. This shows up in ordinary life in the moments before a difficult conversation, when the preparation suddenly stops and the right words simply appear, not the words you practiced, but different words from a different place that are somehow more genuinely what needed to be said. Or the night when the problem you have been working on for days resolves itself while you are not thinking about it. Or the morning when you know what to do with a clarity that all the deliberation had failed to produce. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of arriving at the answer when you had stopped looking for it. The stillness of the moment when the looking stopped, and how different the answer that arrived in that stillness was from the answers you had been producing through effort. Right now, in this breath, you are not looking for anything. The practice of tonight is the practice of stopping the looking. And in the stopping, in the stillness, something is already here, already arrived, already quietly complete. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the ancient masters were subtle, mysterious, profound, responsive. They were like ice about to melt, like uncarved wood, like a valley, like muddy water. And of the muddy water he wrote something unexpected. Who can wait quietly while the mud settles? Who can remain still until the right action arises by itself? The image is not still water as a permanent condition. It is still water as the patient waiting after turbulence, the willingness to not act, not stir, not intervene, while the mud that has been disturbed does what it naturally does when left alone, which is settle. The wisdom is in the waiting. The clarity is the reward of the waiting. The Celtic tradition holds a form of this teaching in its understanding of the relationship between the bard and the poem, the understanding that the poem cannot be forced, only prepared for, only invited, only waited for with the specific quality of readiness that allows it to arrive. The bard who reaches for the poem too eagerly grasps something that is not yet ready and produces something that carries the marks of grasping. The bard who waits, not passively, but in the active, attentive way of someone genuinely listening, may wait a very long time. But what arrives in the waiting is different from what is produced in the reaching. This is the quality that the still water teaches. Not that turbulence is always wrong, but that there is a time to allow the settling, a time to step back from the stirring, a time to let what has been made turbulent find its own way back to clarity. And the wisdom of that waiting is one of the most demanding things the Tao asks of us. There was once a bard who could not write the song she had been given. She was a capable and genuine practitioner of her art. She had been making songs for many years, had offered them at the gatherings that were part of the tradition she served, had received the response that told her the songs were reaching the people she made them for. She was not a beginner. She knew her craft. But this particular song was different. She had been aware of it for months, aware in the specific, slightly uncomfortable way of something that is present at the edge of perception, but not yet fully formed. A quality, a feeling, a sense of what the song was about, without the specific shapes in which it wanted to be said. She had tried to write it many times. Each attempt had produced something, words, images, a structure that felt like the wrong thing. Correct on the surface, not right underneath. She brought this to an elder in her tradition, a very old man who had been a bard for most of his life and who had, she knew, a specific reputation. That his best work came in periods when he was not producing anything visible at all. "I have a song I cannot write," she said. She described it, what she knew of it, what she had tried, why each attempt had failed. The elder listened with his eyes partly closed, his listening posture she had learned. "How long have you been trying to write it?" he asked. She told him. "And in that time," he said, "have you written other things?" "Yes," she said, "the other things came easily. This one will not." "Yes," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "What is the last thing you do before you try to write it?" she thought. "I prepare," she said. "I think about what it should be. I consider the images. I try to arrive at it with some direction." He nodded. "And what is it doing while you are preparing?" She had not thought of it this way, as a thing with its own activity. "I don't know," she said. "It is settling," he said. "Songs settle the way water settles. The disturbed water does not settle while you are stirring it. He looked at her. Your preparation, your thinking about what it should be, your arriving at it with direction. This is the stirring. Each attempt that does not produce it is another stirring. So I should not try, she asked. You should wait differently, he said, not the waiting of someone who is resting between attempts, the waiting of someone who has made room. He paused. There is an active quality to genuine waiting that is not the same as doing nothing. It is holding the space without filling it, keeping yourself available without reaching. He looked at her. The song knows what it is. It is not ready to be what it is in the shapes you have been offering it. It needs shapes that are not yet available. And those shapes will become available, not when you find them, but when the water clears enough that you can see them where they already are. She went home without the song, but she stopped trying to write it. She stopped arriving at the practice table with a direction. She came and she sat and she waited in the specific way the elder had described, holding the space without filling it. 3 weeks later, she woke in the early morning and the song was there, not in outline but complete, as though it had been waiting for the moment when the surface was clear enough to be visible. She wrote it quickly, not because it was simple, because it was already whole. When she offered it at the next gathering, something happened that her other songs had not always produced. The room grew very still, not the polite, receiving stillness of an audience, a different stillness, the stillness of people who had recognized something. Celtic wisdom traditions hold the concept of imbas, inspired knowledge, the quality of poetic or prophetic insight that arises not from deliberate thought, but from a deeper source, from the connection between the practitioner and the living world that the long practice of genuine attention cultivates. Imbas cannot be forced. It can be invited. The traditional Gaelic poets' practice included specific periods of darkness, lying in darkness, alone, attended by no sense impressions, not as deprivation, but as the clearing of the surface that allows the deep knowing to rise. The concept of awen in the Welsh bardic tradition is similar, the flowing spirit, the inspired breath that moves through the bard in the moment of genuine composition. Awen is not something the bard produces, it is something the bard receives, and the quality of the reception depends on the quality of the bard's openness, which is itself the product of the long cultivation of the specific kind of attention that the tradition demands. There is also in Celtic tradition the understanding of the oranmo, the great song, the music of the universe that underlies all things, which is always already present and which the individual song or poem is an expression of. The bard who accesses the oranmo is not creating, they are transmitting. And the transmission requires a stillness that the constant effort of production cannot provide. Think about the thing you have been trying too hard to produce, the idea you have been reaching for that keeps slipping away when you reach, the understanding you have been chasing that retreats as you advance. The quality of presence in a relationship or a practice that you have been trying to achieve through effort and that has remained stubbornly unavailable to the effort. The mud is in the water. the stirring adds more mud. And the particular irony of it is that the stirring is motivated by the desire for clarity, and the stirring is what prevents the clarity. This shows up in ordinary life in the problem that cannot be solved by thinking about it more. The stuck thing that additional effort makes more stuck, the question that produces more questions the harder you look at it. And how sometimes the solution arrives not in the next attempt, but in the gap between the attempts. In the moment when you set it down and did something entirely different and came back to find that the water had cleared while you were not watching. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of the morning after a night of genuine, unstirred sleep. How differently a problem looked in the first light of that morning than it had looked the night before. Nothing had changed in the problem, but the water had settled, and the clarity the settled water offered was something no amount of continued evening effort had been able to produce. Right now, in this breath, you are allowing the settling. Nothing is required of you tonight but the specific non-doing of letting the mud find its way down. The song is in the water, the clarity is in the waiting, and the waiting tonight is already happening. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the soft and weak overcome the hard and strong, not through force, but through patient persistence. The water that wears the stone does not compete with the stone. It simply continues to be water, and water's nature, sustained long enough, produces what no amount of force could produce. This is wu-wei, effortless action, action that arises from depth and moves with the nature of things rather than against it. The Ubuntu tradition holds a specific and practical understanding of this in its concept of communal depth, the understanding that the community's deepest knowing is not held in its most vocal members, but distributed across the whole, including and especially in the members who are quietest. The wisdom of the community is not in any individual's surface contribution. It is in the accumulated, lived experience of many people across many generations, and this accumulated wisdom has the specific quality of deep water, still on the surface, carrying enormous depth and weight beneath. A community that operates only from its surface voices, from the most articulate, the most confident, the most willing to speak, is a community operating in its shallow water. The depth is elsewhere. It is in the people who have seen more than they say, who have lived more than they display, who carry more than they are asked to carry in the gatherings where the surface voices dominate. The great teacher in the Ubuntu tradition is the community itself, when it is genuinely heard. All of it, not just the part that knows how to speak in meetings. There was once a community elder who had been carrying the deep water for many years without anyone knowing. She was not old in years, middle-aged perhaps, but she was old in a specific way that age of years does not always produce. She had been paying attention to the community for a very long time, with a quality of attention that was quiet enough that most people did not notice they were being attended to. She sat in the back of gatherings. She listened without taking notes, in the way of someone for whom the note-taking would get in the way of the listening. She rarely spoke in formal council. What she did instead was talk to people one at a time, over the years, in the ordinary moments of daily life, at the water point, in the garden, after the gatherings when everyone was dispersing. She asked questions that were never intrusive, but that had the specific quality of genuine interest, of wanting to know the actual thing rather than the thing people usually said when asked. Over the years, she had heard a great deal that was not said in meetings. A difficult situation arose in the community. A conflict between two families that had been simmering for some time and that had now reached a point where it required formal counsel. The council met. The spokespeople for each family presented their positions. The positions were articulate and well prepared and completely contradictory. The council discussed the conflict at length. It generated much heat and little resolution. The surface positions had been well stated. The surface arguments had been thoroughly made, and the council was no closer to a resolution. After a long session, a moment arrived when the energy in the room had shifted, when the formal positions had been exhausted and everyone was sitting with the specific tiredness that comes not from the length of the gathering, but from the circularity of it. The woman in the back of the room spoke. She had been there the whole time. She had said nothing until now. When she spoke, it was without preamble. She named something that was not in either family's formal presentation, a specific event from 12 years earlier that she had learned about in one of those quiet, one-at-a-time conversations she had been having for years. An event that had nothing to do with the surface conflict, but that, she explained quietly, was the actual origin of the difficulty, not the thing the families were fighting about. The thing beneath the thing. The room was very still. Both family representatives sat with this. Neither disputed it. The event she had named was real. They had not expected it to be named here, in this gathering, by this person who had said nothing until now. The elder who led the council looked at her and then at the room. "This is where the water actually runs," he said. He meant it as a description of what she had offered, the source rather than the surface. The resolution that followed addressed the actual source. It took time, and it required genuine honesty from both families, but it held. And it held because it was anchored in the actual ground rather than in the surface conflict that had obscured the ground. Afterward, several people in the community asked the woman how she had known. She described it simply: the years of listening, the one-at-a-time conversations, the patient attention to what was not said in the formal settings. The still water, she said, is where the depth is. The formal gatherings are the surface. Most of what is actually happening is happening beneath them. Ubuntu philosophy holds the concept of indlela, the way, the path, the manner of proceeding that reflects deep alignment with what a community actually is and needs. And the indlela is not found through the loudest voices or the most forceful positions. It is found through the slow, patient, inclusive process of genuinely hearing the whole community, all of its voices, including the quiet ones, including the people who have never been asked. The traditional Indaba process, the deep community gathering, is specifically designed to surface this depth. The Indaba is not a debate. It is a listening. Everyone present is heard, not just the officially designated speakers. The gathering does not move to resolution until the voices that would not ordinarily be heard have been offered the genuine space to be heard. And the resolution that emerges from this process is different in quality from the resolution that emerges from the surface debate. It is more durable, more genuinely accepted, more deeply rooted in the actual ground of the community. There is also in Ubuntu tradition the concept of isikchi, the quality of presence, the deep resonance of a person who has genuinely been in their life for a long time, who carries what their years of living have given them without necessarily displaying it. The person of isikchi is recognized in the community not by their position or their performance, but by the specific quality they bring to a gathering, a gravity, a settledness that the community's oldest and most careful members can feel, and that younger members learn to recognize over time. Think about the depth in your community that is not being heard. The person who sits quietly in the back of every meeting and has been doing so for years, accumulating an understanding of what is actually happening that none of the active speakers possess. The colleague who never pushes their view, but whose view, when it occasionally surfaces in a quiet conversation, turns out to be more precisely true than anything said in the formal discussions. The family member who seems peripheral and turns out, at a moment of genuine difficulty, to be the one who knows where the actual ground is. And think about the depth in yourself that you have not been offering. The understanding accumulated through years of paying attention, the quiet knowing that you have not brought to the surface because the surface was busy and it did not seem to be asking for what you had. This shows up in ordinary life in the difference between the conversation that stays at the level of positions and arguments and the conversation that, at a certain moment, drops into the actual ground, where both people stop defending the surface and say what is actually true, and how rare that second conversation is, and how much more it changes when it happens. You may have felt this yourself in the experience of a conflict that was resolved not by the argument that won, but by the thing underneath the argument being named, and how much smaller the conflict looked suddenly from the depth of what was actually there beneath it. Right now, in this breath, the depth you carry is enough. You do not need to bring it to the surface tonight. You do not need to speak or demonstrate or resolve. The water is still. The depth is there. And the community, whatever community holds you, is richer for your presence in it, seen or unseen, heard or waiting to be heard. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the great traveler leaves no tracks. The great speaker makes no mistakes. The great counter uses no tallies. The great closer leaves no bar. What he was pointing at is the quality of genuine mastery, that the master leaves the least visible trace of their mastery. The work has been done so completely that no effort is visible in it. The tracks are there, if you look closely enough, but they do not announce themselves. The Polynesian wayfinding tradition holds this teaching in its most physical form. The master navigator who can cross thousands of miles of open ocean using only the language of the ocean itself. The swells, the stars, the birds, the color of the water, has achieved a depth of knowing that is invisible from the outside. The navigator does not look, in most moments, like a person doing something extraordinary. They are simply present with the ocean. The ocean is speaking to them, and the listening, after enough years, becomes so integrated that the distinction between the navigator and the navigation dissolves. But beneath this apparently effortless mastery is an enormous depth, years of accumulated experience, careful instruction, the patient development of senses that most people do not use and therefore do not develop. The still surface of the navigator's calm, apparently ordinary presence on the ocean is the expression of this depth. The depth does not show, the calm shows, and the calm is not nothing. It is the depth expressing itself through stillness. There was once a young navigator who dismissed the quiet patches of ocean as empty water. He was learning the art of wayfinding from a master, a woman of great experience whose reputation was known across the communities that used the ocean. She had navigated routes that others considered too complex or too dangerous, not because she had superior instruments, but because her reading of the ocean was deeper than theirs. The young navigator was skilled and genuinely promising. He had learned quickly in the early stages. The star paths, the basic swell patterns, the birds and their meanings. He was confident. Perhaps the master had noted quietly to herself, somewhat too confident. On a particular voyage across a stretch of deep ocean, they came to an area where the surface was very still. Stillness in a stretch of open ocean is relatively rare. There is usually swell, the visual evidence of the deep currents and the distant weather that the waves transmit across thousands of miles. This area was quiet. The surface reflected the sky without disturbance. The young navigator was impatient with it. Dead water, he said. He used the old term for patches of ocean, where, according to some, the current and the life were absent. We should move around it. The master looked at the surface. Look at the color, she said. He looked. The water in this still patch was a deeper blue than the water around it, a specific shade of blue that he had noticed but not yet learned to read. What does it mean? He asked. It means the ocean floor is very far down, she said. Further down than anywhere in the surrounding water. She paused. The stillness is the signature of the greatest depth. The ocean above the shallowest places is the most turbulent. Above the deep places, the surface calms. He looked at the still water differently. And the fish? He asked. He had assumed the dead water was fishless. Below, she said. Much further below, not absent, descending. She looked at him. The still patch is not where the ocean is empty. It is where the ocean is deepest. The life is there, the current is there. further down than the surface shows. She navigated through the still water rather than around it. The young navigator watched her as she moved through it. The way her attention was different here than in the more active water, less scanning and more receiving, as though the still water required a different quality of listening than the turbulent water, a quieter kind. When they were through the still patch and into the more active water on the other side, the master was quiet for a while. Then she spoke. "The still patches are the places the old navigators used to find their position," she said. "In turbulent water there is too much noise. You cannot hear the deep. In the still patches, if you are quiet enough and patient enough, you can feel the deep current far below, the swell that is too long and too deep to show at the surface, but that you can feel in the hull if the surface disturbance is not masking it." She looked at the young navigator. "The still water is not dead water. It is the water deep enough that its surface has settled above everything that is happening far below." He went on to become a navigator of considerable reputation. He became known for a specific quality, his ability to read the still patches, which most navigators avoided or passed through quickly. He understood what they were. He understood what they offered. And his courses over the years were shaped by that understanding, using the depth where others saw only emptiness. The master, in her later years, would sometimes speak of this student to others who were learning, not because he had the most spectacular gifts of the navigators she had taught. He did not. But because he had made the specific transition that she considered the most important, from reading the ocean's surface as the whole of the ocean, to reading the surface as the ocean's message about what lay far beneath it. The still patch was not the dead water. The still patch was the deep water. And once a navigator understood this, truly understood it, in the specific way that comes from having been corrected in the middle of the ocean rather than in the abstract, they never confused it again. The correction went as deep as the water had been. In time, his ability to navigate the still patches became a quality that other navigators came to ask about. He described it as he had learned it. The color of the water over the deepest places, the specific quality of attention required in the still water, the sense of listening for what was too far down to show. And some of them heard what he was describing. Some of them, on their first encounter with a still patch after hearing it, felt what the master had pointed at, the depth below the surface, the current running far down, the life that was there and was simply not visible from above. Polynesian wayfinding tradition holds the concept of Wā Kaulua, the double-hulled canoe, the vessel of traditional long-voyage navigation, as not merely a vehicle, but a living relationship between the navigator, the vessel, and the ocean. The navigator does not impose a course on the ocean. The navigator converses with the ocean, using its information to find the course that the ocean itself is offering. The still patch is part of that conversation. It is the ocean speaking at its lowest volume, from its greatest depth. The great wayfinders of the Polynesian tradition, the navigators who accomplished journeys that modern scholars initially refused to believe were intentional, were known for a quality of stillness in themselves that matched the stillness they sought in the ocean. Mau Piailug, the master navigator from Satawal, who revived traditional Pacific navigation in the 20th century, described the practice not as a technical skill, but as a relationship, a quality of being in genuine conversation with the ocean, rather than reading it as a text. The conversation required stillness in the navigator to receive what the ocean was offering in its quietest registers. There is also in Polynesian tradition the concept of mana, the sacred power that accumulates through genuine achievement and genuine relationship, as discussed in an earlier chapter. The mana of the great navigator is not visible in their appearance or their speech. It is visible in the quality of their navigation, in the courses arrived at through means that others cannot account for, in the specific calm that the navigator maintains through conditions that produce anxiety in those around them. The mana is the depth, the calm is the signature. Think about the still patches in your own life that you have been navigating around, the places where the activity level drops, where the noise of the usual texture of your life quiets, the quiet morning, the slow afternoon, the period when the usual turbulence of work and relationship and obligation has temporarily subsided, and what remains is something you are not sure what to do with. The still patches are not the empty patches. They are the patches above the greatest depth, the ones where the quiet surface means something is happening far below the level you can see. The current is there, the life is there. It is simply at a depth that the turbulent surface cannot reach. This shows up in ordinary life in the experience of the genuinely quiet day, not the day of suppressed turbulence, the managed calm, but the day when the surface is genuinely still. And how different the quality of awareness in that day is from the quality in the active days. What becomes visible in the quiet that the noise was covering? What rises quietly in the absence of the usual disturbance? You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of early morning, before the day begins its usual claiming of you, in the moments when the mind is still at its surface and the awareness can drop down through the stillness to where the deep current is. And what you find there, not a thought exactly, but a quality of knowing, of being, that the active hours make impossible to reach. Right now, in this breath, you are in the still patch. The active water is somewhere else tonight. The surface is calm, and very far below, the deep current is running. You do not need to feel it to benefit from it. The navigator rests in the still water too. The resting is part of the voyage. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the Tao is the deep valley of the world, the low place that everything flows toward and nothing flows away from. The valley receives all the water from the surrounding hills. It does not compete or strive. It is simply low enough that the water arrives inevitably where it is. The depth of the valley is what makes it the gathering place. This image of the valley applies to the person of genuine depth in a specific way. The person who has descended, through practice, through genuine encounter with their own life, through the patient years of being present to what is actually there, has become a valley. Things arrive in them. Understanding arrives in them from many directions and gathers. And what gathers in the depth and the patience of genuine valley nature becomes something different from what any individual source brought. It becomes, in the language of the Tao Te Ching, something like the ocean, vast, receiving, always replenished. The Aboriginal Australian understanding of the deep country, the country that has been known and walked and sung for the greatest number of generations, holds a parallel. The oldest country is the quietest country. The country that has been known longest has been worn into itself most completely. The song lines that run through it are the most settled, the most deeply engraved, the most completely woven into what the country is. And the quiet of this country is not the quiet of emptiness. It is the quiet of the most complete knowing. There was once a young person who thought the quiet stretch of country was the empty one. She had been learning the ways of her country from her elders for as long as she could remember, the names of the plants, the paths of the animals, the songs that had been given with the country and that were part of what kept it alive. She had learned quickly and well. She had a genuine affinity for the learning, a quality of attention that the elders had noticed and appreciated. In the course of her learning, she had been taken to many different parts of the country, to the dramatic places, the places of obvious significance, the places where the stories were large and well known, and the evidence of the country's importance was visible to anyone who arrived there. She had found these places moving. She understood their significance and felt it genuinely. Then one afternoon, an elder, a very old woman who had been a keeper of the songs for most of her long life, took her to a part of the country that she had passed through many times but had never thought much about. It was, to her eye, an ordinary stretch. No dramatic features, no immediately obvious significance, no stories she had heard attached to it. Flat, quiet, unremarkable. They walked through it slowly, the elder setting the pace. The elder was quiet. She was walking with a quality of attention that the young person had learned to recognize as different from ordinary walking, a heightened aliveness to what was there, a presence that took in everything without reaching for anything. They stopped at a particular place. There was nothing there that the young person could see as marking it as different from any other place in the stretch. "What do you know about this place?" the elder asked. "Nothing," the young person said honestly. The elder was quiet for a while. "This place," she said finally, "is the oldest ground in everything we walk. The song lines that run through here are older than the ones at the places you know. The country here has been sung for more generations than anyone can count." She looked at the ground, at the sparse grass and the old stones and the ordinary sky above it. And the singing, over all that time, has gone very deep into it, so deep that you cannot see it from above. "How do you know?" the young person asked. "The elders who taught me knew," she said, "and they had it from the elders who taught them." She was quiet. "But there is also a quality you can learn to feel if you spend enough time in country, a quality of depth. It is different from the dramatic places. The dramatic places announce themselves. This kind of place does not." She paused. Drop something into the still water and watch how long it falls. This country is like that. The things you bring to it, your attention, your song, your presence, fall very deep, much further than you expect. The young person stood in the quiet, unremarkable place and tried to feel what the elder was describing. She was not sure at first that she could. Then it was subtle, and she was not sure if she was imagining it. She felt something she had not felt in the dramatic places, a quality of depth beneath the ground she was standing on. Not metaphorically, something almost physical, the sense of standing above something very deep. Yes, the elder said, watching her. She had said nothing, but the elder had seen something in her face. The old country does not need to show itself. It is simply there, very far down. Aboriginal Australian knowledge traditions hold the understanding that country is not inert landscape, but a living presence, one that knows those who belong to it, and that is, in a reciprocal relationship, known by them. The depth of the relationship between people and country is measured not in dramatic encounters, but in the accumulated, patient, multi-generational practice of knowing. The walking of the song lines, the singing of the songs, the returning to the specific places with the specific knowledge of what those places hold. The concept of Chukurpa, the dreaming, the law, the living story that underlies all things, is not a past event. It is the continuing present reality of the country, present in every stone and plant and animal and person who belongs to it, running through everything like the deep current beneath the still water. The quieter the country appears, the more thoroughly, in many cases, the Chukurpa has settled into it. There is also in Aboriginal Australian tradition the concept of Ngura, home country, the country that knows you and that you know, and the understanding that this knowing is a product of time and genuine attention, not of formal study or brief encounter. The person who has walked the same country for decades knows it in a way that recent visitors cannot know it, not because the visitors are inattentive, but because the depth of knowing requires depth of time. The still water below is arrived at only through patient descent. Think about the quiet country in your life, the places and the people and the practices that you have been walking past without recognizing their depth. The relationship that has been there so long it seems ordinary. The practice that has become so integrated into daily life that it no longer announces itself as significant. The understanding that is so completely yours now that you have forgotten there was a time before it, and do not think to notice what it is doing for you in each ordinary day. These are the deep country, not dramatic, not obvious, simply old and known and settled very far down into what you are. The song lines of your actual life. This shows up in ordinary life in the discovery that the most valuable thing in a period of genuine difficulty was not the dramatic resource, but the quiet one. Not the most visible support, but the long, patient, deeply rooted one. The friend who has been there for 15 years and whose simple presence in the crisis turned out to be exactly what the crisis needed. The practice that had been so ordinary it was almost invisible, and that in the moment of need was the most solid ground available. You may have felt this yourself in the experience of looking around in a difficult moment and finding that what held you was the thing you had not thought of as particularly remarkable, the old friendship, the quiet habit, the unremarkable daily returning to something that was simply always there. Right now, in this breath, you are walking through the old country. The ground beneath you is older than you know. The song lines that run through this body, this life, this particular way of being in the world, they go very far down, very much further than the ordinary surface of the day would suggest. The settling of tonight is the settling of something very ancient, in very deep country. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The depth that can be displayed is not the genuine depth. The quality that is most real, most present, most fundamental in anything, including a person, is precisely the quality that cannot be summarized, named, packaged, or displayed. It can only be encountered directly in the quality of presence that genuine depth produces. The Mayan tradition holds a very specific and very grounded form of this teaching in its understanding of the relationship between the visible and the invisible in time. The understanding that the most important cycles are not the most dramatic ones, that the periods of apparent quiet in the calendar are very often the periods of the deepest turning, when cycles that take hundreds or thousands of years to complete are at their most significant and least visible moments. This understanding of invisible depth extends in Mayan thought to the relationship between the surface events of history and the deep patterns that the surface events are expressing. The surface is what is visible and what is recorded in the most easily accessible form. The depth is what the surface events are expressions of. The long cycles, the deep patterns, the underlying currents that give the surface its specific shape and meaning. Understanding the depth is the work of the calendar keeper, the IJQ, whose practice is precisely the cultivation of the ability to see what the surface is saying about what is happening far below. There was once a young calendar keeper who thought the quiet periods were the empty ones. She had been learning the keeping of the sacred calendar from a master of her tradition, a man of great age and great learning who had spent his entire adult life in the practice. His knowledge of the calendar was, by any measure, extraordinary. But what set him apart in the understanding of those who knew him was not the breadth of his knowledge, but the depth of his attention to the quiet periods, the stretches of the calendar when, to the ordinary eye, nothing of particular significance was happening. The young keeper had been studying for several years. She was skilled at the visible, dramatic portions of the calendar, the great ceremonies, the significant astronomical events, the moments that everyone in the tradition acknowledged as important. She understood these well and held them with genuine care. But the quiet periods, the stretches between the significant events, the times when the calendar seemed to be simply turning without producing anything visible. These she found harder to attend to. They felt empty. She held them dutifully, but without the quality of presence she brought to the dramatic moments. Her teacher noticed. "You attend to the ceremonies well," he said one afternoon. "Thank you," she said. "And the quiet periods," he said. She was honest. "I find them harder," she said. "There is less to hold, less that is visibly happening." He was quiet for a while. Then he stood and went to a large old recording stone in the corner of his room, a piece that she had seen many times, but that she had never looked at closely, assuming it to be old documentation. He showed it to her. It was a record of a particular quiet period, several years, long ago, when the visible calendar had been relatively uneventful. The recording was meticulous, more detailed, she noticed, than the recordings of the dramatic periods. "Why is this period so carefully recorded?" she asked. "Because this period," he said, "is when the great cycle completed its first quarter." He named the cycle, one of the long ones, the ones that take several hundred years to turn once. The first quarter of this cycle arrived in these years, and nothing visible marked it. No ceremony, no astronomical event, no external sign, just the calendar turning, quietly. "And?" she asked. "And everything that happened in the 50 years that followed," he said, "was shaped by the fact that this cycle had completed its first quarter. The surface events in those 50 years were expressions of the turning that had happened in this quiet period." He looked at her. The people living through this quiet period did not know they were at the moment of the first quarter. They knew it was a quiet time. They may have thought it was an empty time. She looked at the careful record. "The keeper who made this record," she said slowly, "knew what it was." "Yes," he said, "because the keeper attended to the quiet periods with the same quality of presence he brought to the dramatic ones. Because he understood that the quiet is where the deep cycles are most purely themselves, unmasked by the drama of the surface events, simply turning, completing what they have been moving toward for centuries." He looked at her. "The still water above the deepest place. The quiet time is the time of the deepest turning." She returned to the quiet periods with different attention after this. Not the dutiful holding of something unremarkable, but the genuine, alert attending to something that was, she now understood, of the most profound significance, precisely because it was quiet, because its significance was not on the surface. Mayan cosmological tradition holds the concept of the Baktun, the great period of 400 years in the long count calendar, as one of the major cycles within which the patterns of history and cosmic unfolding are understood. And within the Baktun, the Ach-Ij, the daykeeper, understands that the quiet periods are often the periods of the deepest turning of longer cycles, cycles that the individual human life, and even the individual historical era, cannot fully perceive. The concept of Quiche time in Mayan tradition is not linear. It is cyclical. And within the cycles, what appears at the surface is understood as an expression of what is turning at the depth. The skill of the calendar keeper is precisely the ability to read the surface expression and identify the deep cycle it is expressing. to see the still water and know what is running deep beneath it. There is also in Mayan tradition the concept of chulel, the spiritual essence, the deep quality of being that underlies the visible person, which accumulates and develops through time and genuine living in a way that the surface biography does not fully capture. The elder whose chulel is most developed is not necessarily the one whose surface history is most dramatic. It may be the one who has lived most genuinely in the quiet periods, attending to what was there rather than what was visible. Think about the quiet period you are currently in, or the quiet period you have recently emerged from, and what may have been turning in its depths. The stretch of time that seemed, from the surface, to be relatively unremarkable, where the dramatic events were elsewhere, where what was happening in your life was not the kind of thing that would make a good story at a gathering, and yet, looking back, or looking carefully into the present, what was completing, what was turning, what was arriving at a quarter or half of its long revolution in exactly this quiet period. The most significant changes in a life are often the ones that happen without ceremony, without announcement, in the quiet periods. And the discovery of what they were often comes later, sometimes much later, when the surface has finally expressed what the depth has been doing. This shows up in ordinary life in the person who reflects on a period of apparent stagnation and discovers from a sufficient distance that it was the period of the most fundamental change. The relationship that deepened most in the quiet years rather than the dramatic ones. The understanding that settled most completely in the unremarkable seasons. You may have felt this yourself in the specific recognition, looking back at a seemingly empty period, that something very large had completed its first quarter there, that the quiet had not been emptiness, that the surface had simply not shown what was happening far below. Right now, in this breath, some cycle is completing something, quietly, without announcement. The calendar is turning in the deep place, where the turns are longest and the surface gives no sign. You are in the deep period. The keeper attends. The attending is enough. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu ended the Tao Te Ching, or rather allowed it to come to rest, with an image of the sage who does not accumulate. The sage gives and has more. The sage does not compete, and therefore no one can compete with them. The depth of the sage is not a thing that can be compared or assessed or overtaken, because it is not performing itself, and therefore there is no visible performance to measure against. The Norse tradition holds a specific and grounded version of this teaching in its understanding of the relationship between depth and stillness in the human character. The saga's honor, alongside the warrior's obvious courage and strength, a quality they call drengskapa, the quality of being a genuine person, a quality that includes honesty, reliability, and the specific kind of controlled depth that does not need to announce itself. The drengra, the person of genuine character, is not always the loudest or the most dramatic. They are the one whose depth has been demonstrated, quietly, over time and through difficulty. But the Norse tradition also holds a final and specific teaching about still water that is perhaps the most precise formulation of tonight's central image, the well. Not the lake, not the river, not the ocean, the well. The well is water that has descended to its deepest possible point, that sits in darkness far below the surface of the earth, that is reached only by those who go down to it deliberately. The Norse understanding of wisdom, hugger, the deep mind, is specifically described as something drawn from a well. Odin in the Norse mythology gave an eye for a drink from the well of Mimir, the well of memory and wisdom. The well is deep because it has gone down through everything to reach what lies at the bottom. And what lies at the bottom is what feeds the springs. There was once a young warrior who was passed over for a position of honor because he did not boast. The tradition of his community included a specific practice. At certain gatherings, the men who sought positions of leadership or trust would speak their accomplishments before the assembled community. This was not considered vain. It was considered necessary, a way of making visible what was otherwise invisible, of giving the community the information it needed to place its trust wisely. The young warrior had genuine accomplishments. He had proven himself in several difficult situations. He had the qualities that the community valued: courage, steadiness, the ability to act well under pressure. But he found the practice of speaking his accomplishments difficult, not because he was ashamed of them, because they seemed to him to speak for themselves. He had been where he had been and done what he had done. The saying of it felt like a diminishment. He spoke briefly and without elaboration. He named what had happened. He did not expand on his role. He did not add the shaping that would have made his contribution sound larger than it was. He spoke, essentially, the plain truth. The position went to another man, a man whose accomplishments were real, but who had spoken of them with the specific skill of someone who understood what elaboration could produce in an audience. An older warrior in the community, a man whose own reputation needed no elaboration because it was older than most people's memories, found the young warrior afterward. "You did not say enough," the older man said. He said it not as a criticism, but as an observation. "I said what was true," the young warrior said. "Yes," the older man said, "and what is true, said plainly, is often not enough for those who have not yet seen it." He was quiet for a moment. "There is a well in the old country," he said, "very deep, very cold. The water from it is different from the water of the stream, clearer, colder, coming from much further down." He looked at the young warrior. "A person who has never tasted the well water does not know, from looking at the well, what is different about it. You have to go to the well and draw from it and taste it." He paused. "Your depth is the well, but you have not yet found the way to invite people to draw from it. I do not know how to make what is true sound larger than it is," the young warrior said. "Not larger," the older man said, "clearer. There is a difference." He looked at him steadily. "You speak your accomplishments as facts. Facts are the surface of the water. What the community needs to trust you is not only the facts, it is the quality beneath the facts, the steadiness, the judgment, the specific way you moved in those situations. He paused. Tell them not only what happened, tell them what you saw and what you chose and why. That is not elaboration. That is depth made visible. The young warrior brought this to the next gathering. He spoke of the same accomplishments, the same situations, the same facts. But this time, where before he had said only what had happened, he also said what he had seen in those moments, what he had understood, what he had chosen and why. He did not make himself larger. He made himself more legible. The community heard something different. They heard the quality beneath the surface, the judgment, the seeing, the specific steadiness that the plain facts had not conveyed. They heard the depth. He was given a different responsibility after that, and it proved to be the one he was genuinely suited for. Not because he had performed well, but because the community had finally been able to read the water clearly enough to know how deep it went. Norse tradition holds the concept of the well of Mimir, the well of memory, of wisdom, of the deep knowing that underlies all things, as the source from which Odin draws his understanding of the world. The exchange he makes to drink from it, one eye, his ability to see the surface clearly, is understood in the tradition not as loss, but as transformation. What he gives up is the surface sight. What he gains is the depth, the insight of the deep well, is worth more than the vision of the surface. The Norse concept of saidra, the specific practice of deep knowing, of accessing the depth of what is, was practiced by those who had descended far below the ordinary surface of perception and returned with what the depth contains. The seeress, the vulva, was valued not for her performance, but for her access to the deep well. And the well, in this tradition, is always described as cold, dark, and requiring genuine descent. The shallows are warm and bright. The well is cold and dark and very far down. There is also in Norse tradition the concept of word, the web of fate, the deep pattern beneath all surface events, which the vulva can sometimes see and the ordinary person cannot. And word is not the surface of events, it is what the surface expresses. The ability to read word is the ability to drop the stone into the water and watch how long it falls, to feel, in the duration of the descent, the measure of the depth. Think about the depth you have that you have not yet found a way to make visible. The understanding you carry that is genuine and settled and true, that has not found the right form of expression, the way of saying the thing that allows people to receive it rather than simply reporting the surface facts that contain it. The quality in you that the people who know you well can see, and that the people who have just met you cannot, not because it is hidden, but because it requires a certain quality of encounter to perceive. The well is there, the water is there, it is cold and dark and very far down, and it is exactly as deep as it needs to be. The question is not whether you have it. The question is how you learn to invite people to come and draw from it, rather than just describing the well from the surface. This shows up in ordinary life, in the gap between what you know about something and your ability to convey it, and how what you know at the deepest level is usually the hardest to convey, because it lives below the level of articulation, in the level of direct experience, and the direct experience is not transmissible through description alone. The well can be conveyed only by inviting someone to drink from it. The depth can be conveyed only by finding the way to bring them into genuine contact with what the depth contains. You may have felt this yourself in the specific experience of being finally understood by someone, not a surface understanding of what you had said, but genuine contact with what you meant, and how rare that experience is, and how unmistakable it is when it happens, and how it almost always happens not through elaborate explanation, but through a moment of genuine quiet contact. The still water, entered together, reveals its depth differently than the description of the still water. Right now, in this breath, you are already deep. The water level is where it is. The well has been going down for all the years of your life. Tonight, you do not need to show anyone how deep. You do not need to invite anyone to drink. Tonight, the well rests. The water is still. The depth is simply there, in the quiet, carrying what it carries. And the carrying is enough. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Tonight we began with a simple and ancient image. A lake at night, its surface perfectly still, a stone dropped into it taking far longer to reach the bottom than its stillness would ever suggest. And over 13 chapters, we let that image open into the full teaching it carries. We sat with a young student who mistook his teacher's silence for emptiness, and discovered, after 3 days at the lake, that what arrived slowly in him after her few words was still descending long after he had walked away. We accompanied a young warrior who dismissed the quiet elder at council, and found in a moment of genuine difficulty that the elder's quality of listening had carried what all the speaking could not. We watched a student decide his growth had stalled because the excitement of the early years had quieted, and learned that the full basin is always quieter than the basin filling. We crossed a river with a pilgrim who learned what the still surface of deep water means only by entering it. We sat with a monk who had been holding the surface flat through suppression rather than depth, and learned the difference between the stone held above the water and the stone allowed to fall. We listened to a young scholar judge a Rebbe by how little he said, and discovered that the Rebbe had been listening to what was beneath the words all along. We watched a calligraphy student produce his best work on the day he stopped trying. We heard a bard learn to wait for the song that could not be produced but only received. We listened to a quiet community elder name the root of a conflict no one else had heard, because she had been listening below the surface for years. We traveled with a young navigator who discovered that the still patches of ocean are the patches above the greatest depth. We walked with a young woman through the oldest, quietest country and felt, for just a moment, how far down the oldest knowledge goes. We attended to the calendar keeper, who learned that the quiet periods are when the longest cycles are completing their quietest turns. And we sat with a young warrior who learned to make his depth legible, not larger, but visible, by speaking not just the facts, but the quality beneath the facts. Across all of these, the teaching is the same, and it is simple. The still surface is not the surface of something empty. It is the surface of something very deep. We live in a world that reads activity as substance. The turbulent surface looks full of something. The still surface looks as though nothing is happening. But turbulence is a surface phenomenon. Only shallow water moves across its entire extent. The deep lake absorbs the stone with barely a sound. The deep river has no visible current from the bank. The deepest ocean is perfectly smooth. And the deepest person, the person most genuinely settled in who they are and what they know and how they love, is not the loudest or the most dramatic or the most visibly in process. They are the one whose stillness, when you encounter it, has a specific and unmistakable weight to it. The quality of something that goes very far down. This teaching is not completed once. The confusion between still and empty runs very deep. It is easy in any given week to mistake the quiet phase for the empty phase, to mistake the full basin for the empty one because it is no longer making the sounds of filling. The lake requires re-noticing. The deep river requires re-entering. The navigator's still patch requires re-reading. And the depth in yourself, the depth you have earned through the patient years of genuine living, of showing up, of continuing to walk the country of your actual life, this too requires re-recognizing. Not because it has gone anywhere, because the surface confusion is persistent, and the re-recognition is the practice. You do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. If one image stayed with you, the stone still descending, the still patch above the deepest water, the elder's quality of listening, let that be enough. The understanding that is genuinely yours will be with you in the morning. Wherever you are right now, you are welcome here, exactly as you are, with your depth, seen or unseen, with your still surface and whatever is running beneath it, with whatever you are carrying tonight and whatever is ready to settle. The stone is still falling, the water is receiving it, and the depth is already here. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night.